John Brown might not be the first name that pops into your head when you think about bodybuilding legends, but that only makes his story even more surprising. He stood out in the 70s and 80s, a period when the sport was changing fast, and he left a mark that even the biggest icons still talk about today. From the very first steps of his journey, it's clear we're looking at someone who didn't just want to compete. He wanted to redefine the stage. What John Brown brought to the table was rare, an aesthetically flawless physique, a magnetic stage presence, and posing routines that looked like perfectly rehearsed performances. He didn't just hop on stage and flex, he told a story with his body. This fresh approach grabbed the attention not only of the judges, but especially of the crowd, who immediately sensed they were watching something completely different from the usual competition format. Even with impressive titles like Mr. Universe in 1981 and 1982 and 3 Mr. World wins, Brown never reached the mainstream fame of names like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Ronnie Coleman. And that raises a real question. How does someone so talented and influential end up left out of the sport's big narratives? John Brown was more than just a gifted athlete. He became a symbol of resilience. At a time when bodybuilding still carried strong racial barriers, he inspired countless young African-American athletes who saw in him living proof that talent and discipline could break through walls built by prejudice. His name echoed backstage, inside gyms, and on stages, always with respect attached to it. John Brown's story starts far from the bright lights of major competitions. He was born in West Sacramento, but it was in Compton, one of Los Angeles's toughest neighborhoods, that his personality was forged. Growing up surrounded by violence, limitations, and very few opportunities didn't stop him from dreaming. If anything, that environment lit the fire that pushed him to chase something bigger. Before discovering bodybuilding, John was obsessed with football. It filled his days, his training sessions, and his teenage dreams. But he knew that to stand out on the field, he needed to get stronger. That's how, at just 14, he touched a weight for the first time. Inspired by the muscle-bound heroes he saw in comic books, he decided to transform his own body, completely unaware that he was taking the first step into the journey that would define his entire life. His turning point came 2 years later. At 16, while training alone in a local park, a stranger walked up to him and said something simple but powerful. "You were born for bodybuilding." For most people, that would have been just a comment. For John, it was a calling. That sentence planted a seed that grew fast. He didn't just think about competing, he decided to do it right away. And it didn't take long to prove that stranger right. Still a teenager, John started competing against grown men, many with years of experience under their belts. Even so, he didn't just step on stage with confidence. He impressed judges and spectators with his structure, proportions, and his fearless attitude. It was the rise of a competitor who wasn't afraid to start small to chase something big. When John Brown officially entered the competitive bodybuilding scene, it didn't take long for people to notice. By 1975 and 1976, competing for the AAU while still just a teenager, his results were so consistent that many veterans were shocked. It wasn't common to see someone that young go head-to-head with seasoned athletes, and even less common to see him land on the podium as often as he did. That promising start opened doors quickly. John moved up to regional, state, and soon enough, national competitions. Every stage became a showcase of his evolution, and each performance made it clear he wasn't just another guy trying to pack on size. He was there to present something different. It didn't take long for the bodybuilding world to realize that his style broke the mold. John Brown's greatest advantage was the balance he brought between strength and artistry. His physique was defined by symmetry, proportion, and a clean aesthetic that stood out for its harmony. He didn't chase extremes, he chased the beauty of the whole. While many athletes focus solely on size, John worked on building a balanced look, a physique that communicated with the stage in a stylish, impactful way. But it was on stage that he truly stood out. His posing routines were nothing like the traditional style. John brought in fluid transitions, body expression, dance elements, and a musicality that made his performances unforgettable. He didn't just pose, he performed. The audience felt like they were watching a show, not just a checklist of mandatory poses. And that raised the bar for everyone who came after him. When we talk about John Brown, we're not just talking about a strong bodybuilder. We're talking about someone who understood the sport on an almost philosophical level. His training philosophy rested on four pillars: discipline, symmetry, aesthetics, and the famous mind-muscle connection. To him, training a muscle wasn't simply lifting weight. It was about feeling every fiber contract, shaping the body the same way a sculptor shapes a masterpiece. His training style reflected that unique mindset. John liked to combine high volume, heavy loads, and an intensity that made it clear he was always pushing past his limits. But what really set him apart was the amount of time he dedicated to posing practice. While most athletes treated posing as just another requirement, he treated it as a full study. Hours and hours of refining gestures, angles, and expressions, and that made all the difference under the lights. For Brown, the stage wasn't just a place to show muscles. He believed every performance needed to say something more. It had to tell a story, pull the audience in, create emotion. He used to say that muscles impress, but performance connects. And that's where he shined, in the ability to turn his routine into something the audience watched with pure excitement. This way of seeing bodybuilding is what made John one of the greatest performers in the sport's history. His command of the stage was so strong that even decades later, athletes still study his routines to learn how to blend strength with art. But John Brown's journey wasn't defined only by intense training and big titles. It also carried the weight of a harsh and unfair reality. In American bodybuilding during the 70s and 80s, structural racism was obvious, and Brown faced it head-on. He knew that, besides competing against other athletes, he was also fighting a system that didn't offer black athletes the same opportunities. One of the most shocking moments happened when he tried to land the cover of a major fitness magazine. The owners simply refused, saying that a black man on the cover would hurt sales. It wasn't about merit, physique, or achievements. It was plain prejudice. It's hard to imagine the emotional impact of something like that, especially for someone working relentlessly to make his mark in the sport. But while doors were shutting in the United States, the opposite was happening across the ocean. Europe saw him completely differently. In countries like Germany, John Brown was treated like a celebrity, respected for his flawless physique, his unique performances, and the artistic standard he brought to the stage. Over there, he found the recognition his dedication deserved. This contrast shaped his worldview deeply. For many black athletes of that era, traveling to Europe meant receiving, for the first time, the respect they were denied back home. And for Brown, that welcome didn't just boost his career, it influenced major personal decisions too, including the connections he made and the family he built on European soil. John Brown's personal life reveals an even more fascinating side than his athletic accomplishments. During a fitness expo in Cologne, Germany, he met Miriam, a young German woman who quickly became the love of his life. What seemed like a casual encounter ended up changing his future completely. Far from the competitive atmosphere of gyms and stages, something simple, human, and deep began, and that's how they started building a life based on affection, partnership, and shared dreams. The couple got married and decided to build a family, but John wanted something special for his kids. Deeply passionate about Egyptian culture, he chose names loaded with strength, identity, and meaning: Equanimous, Osiris, and Amon-Ra. He used to say there were plenty of John Browns in the world, but nobody would ever have children like his. It was his way of giving each of them a name that carried a sense of uniqueness and purpose, something they would take with them for life. Miriam also played a huge role in shaping the boys. Being German, she made sure they grew up bilingual, balancing their American roots with their European heritage. Later on, the family enrolled them in a French school, where they became trilingual. That multicultural education didn't just broaden their worldview. It helped shape the confidence and discipline they'd carry into their athletic careers. And as you might expect, the athletic talent came straight from their father. All three followed the sport's path, but each one found his place in football. Equanimous St. Brown made NFL history playing for the Packers and the Bears. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the youngest, became one of the stars of the Detroit Lions. And Osiris St. Brown, just as dedicated, shined in college football as part of the Stanford Cardinal. 3 sons, 3 paths, 1 legacy. Born from a childhood built on discipline, love, and purpose. The Brown family is a powerful example of how values passed on at home can echo through generations. John taught effort, identity, and confidence. Miriam brought culture, languages, and a global mindset. And the kids? They turned all that into achievement. They became the living proof of a legacy that started on bodybuilding stages but found its real strength inside their home. John Brown's bodybuilding career is divided into two very distinct, but equally important, phases. The first, his amateur era, was simply overwhelming. Between 1975 and 1983, Brown didn't just compete, he dominated. Year after year, new trophies, new victories, and the growing certainty that the kid from Compton wasn't there by accident. His talent, paired with almost obsessive discipline, quickly turned him into one of the strongest names on the circuit. The titles from that phase are impressive even today. Among the most iconic are his two Mr. Universe trophies, one in 1981 and 1982, along with his three Mr. World crowns. Brown also lit up the WABA stage, taking home multiple gold medals at the World Championships. And behind all of that was a long list of regional and national wins. The second phase of his competitive journey began in 1984 when he entered the IFBB professional circuit. Now the challenge was different. The stages were bigger, the opponents were legends in the making, and the sport itself was evolving fast. Even so, John Brown carved out space for himself in major contests like the Night of Champions, the Ironman Pro Invitational, and the Detroit Pro Championships. In 1985, he reached one of the biggest milestones of his career. He stepped onto the Mr. Olympia stage, finishing in 14th place. Although this professional phase didn't replicate the absolute dominance of his amateur years, it cemented Brown as a resilient competitor, someone who could stand toe-to-toe with the best in the world. His showings were consistent, his placements always solid, and his presence on stage unmistakable. Above all, he remained an artist of bodybuilding. When the stage lights finally started to dim for John Brown, he didn't see it as an ending. He saw it as a new chance to leave his mark on the sport. After decades of competing, he shifted his focus to something that had always been part of who he was: teaching. He became a coach, a mentor, and a reference point for athletes who wanted not just muscle mass, but presence, style, and identity on stage. His total mastery of posing turned him into a global standout in that area. For many, he wasn't just a former athlete giving tips. He was a true choreographer for bodybuilders. His artistic vision, refined over years of dedication, lived on through his students. He helped athletes understand that showing the physique is just as important as building it, something very few coaches truly master. John's influence crossed generations. Young athletes, many who weren't even born during his prime, sought his guidance to learn how to turn their routines into unforgettable performances. He taught details like timing, expression, rhythm, flow, always reinforcing that every pose should convey emotion. Offstage, Brown also found a new path alongside his sons. Together, they jumped into fitness-related projects, including the creation of Cane Protein, a brand blending health, performance, and lifestyle. That partnership between father and sons shows not only their shared love for fitness, but also how John always used sports as a way to pass down discipline and family values. John Brown's post-career chapter proves something essential. Great athletes don't disappear when they stop competing. They reinvent themselves, multiply through others, and keep shaping the sport in ways that are quiet, but incredibly powerful. When we talk about the greatest posers in bodybuilding history, John Brown's name naturally shows up right next to giants like Ed Corney and Frank Zane. That trio represents the absolute peak of artistic expression in the sport, each one transforming the stage into a real visual experience in their own way. And John, with his magnetic personality and unmistakable style, earned a special place on that list, even if many only realized his brilliance years later. His legacy stands on three pillars that reshaped the way bodybuilding came to be seen. The first is his classic aesthetic, a physique built on symmetry, clean lines, and an almost sculptor-like view of the human body. The second is his artistic vision, which elevated posing into a form of communication, something far beyond the required movements. And the third is his extreme work ethic, his famous motto, "No one's gonna outwork me," which guided his training, his performances, and his entire life as an athlete. Beyond his technical and artistic contributions, John Brown's recognition is also tied to the courage he showed in facing social barriers that many preferred to ignore. His presence on stage during a time of blatant racism, both inside and outside the sport, opened doors for Black athletes who came after him. John didn't just compete. He pushed back, stood his ground, and overcame obstacles that should never have existed. Today, even if his name isn't as widely promoted as other legends, he's respected by experts, historians, and athletes who truly understand the importance of innovation. John Brown's story reminds us that bodybuilding is about much more than trophies and medals. It's about discipline, courage, art, and above all, about believing in yourself even when the world insists you shouldn't. When you follow his journey, you realize he wasn't just an athlete. He was a symbol of transformation, someone who used the stage as a way to inspire generations. And now that you've seen everything he lived through, I've got a question for you. Which part of his story hit you the hardest? If this video inspired you in any way, I'd like to invite you to support our work. Drop a like. It helps the channel reach more people who love stories like this. And if you want to be part of our community and support the project even more, consider becoming a member. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our next videos about the legends who helped build the world of bodybuilding. Your comment also matters a lot. Tell me down below which phase of John Brown's life impressed you the most. His tough childhood, his total dominance on stage, or the legacy he passed on to his kids. Before you go, check out the video that's about to pop up on your screen. It continues this trip through bodybuilding history with another incredible figure you need to know. I'll see you there for another inspiring journey.